As I entered the house that evening, I was taken aback to find Rebecca in tears at the kitchen table. This was entirely uncharacteristic of her. My stepmother had always maintained a composed and somewhat distant demeanor. She was not the type to allow her emotions to overflow in such a manner. Yet there she was, her shoulders trembling, her face hidden in her hands, quietly sobbing for a moment. The kitchen light cast a soft glow over her figure, and the atmosphere felt heavy with unspoken words. I felt an urge to turn away, to pretend I had not witnessed her in this state, but I found myself unable to do so. Despite the emotional barrier that had always existed between us, I could not simply abandon her. "Rebecca," I said softly, moving closer. Initially, she did not respond, and for a fleeting moment I wondered if she had not heard me. However, she eventually lifted her head, her tear-streaked face illuminated by the light. The expression in her eyes was a blend of fear, confusion, and an indescribable emotion that eluded me. Before I realized it, I was beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder, uncertain of how to proceed. She flinched slightly at my touch but did not withdraw. Instead, she turned toward me and, without warning, leaned in. The moment unfolded so swiftly that I had no time to react. Her lips brushed against mine in a gentle, urgent kiss. I could sense her trembling, her breath catching as she pulled back almost immediately, her eyes wide with shock at what had just occurred. Neither of us spoke. I was at a loss for words. My mind raced with the realization that Rebecca, my stepmother, had just kissed me. It felt entirely wrong, yet the gravity of the moment lingered in the air, like a dense fog, leaving us both uncertain of how to navigate it. Suddenly she stood up, her chair scraping against the floor, shattering the silence. "I'm sorry," she stammered, her voice barely audible. Before I could reply, she hurried past me and exited the kitchen, leaving me there, bewildered and more confused than I had ever been. The next morning everything felt different. Rebecca and I had barely crossed paths since the night before, and when we did it was brief, just a flicker of eye contact before we both looked away. The air between us felt heavy, thick with something unspoken, something neither of us dared acknowledge. It had been a week since the kiss, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. I didn't know if she felt the same, but her avoidance was answer enough. I couldn't get that brief moment out of my head, the warmth of her lips, the desperation in her movements. But the confusion that followed made it impossible to make sense of any of it. Then on a rainy afternoon I came home to find her standing outside by her car, staring at the ground. She hadn't seen me approach for a split second. I thought about just walking past her, pretending I didn't see her, but something inside me wouldn't let me. "Rebecca." I called out. She turned, and before I could think, she walked up to me, eyes filled with something I couldn't read. There was a pause just long enough for us both to understand what was about to happen. Then she kissed me again. This time it wasn't desperate but heavy with everything we'd been avoiding. Weeks passed but nothing felt the same. The kiss lingered between us like a shadow. We couldn't escape. I tried to shake it off, to pretend it never happened. But the truth was, I couldn't. Every time I saw Rebecca, that moment replayed in my mind, the warmth of her lips, the way she'd looked at me like we were both crossing a line we knew we shouldn't, and yet there was no going back. We barely spoke. Now it was as if the entire house had fallen into a state of quiet tension. My father remained blissfully unaware, busy with work and always on the move. He never noticed the long silences between me and Rebecca, or how we seemed to avoid being in the same room for too long. If he did, he never mentioned it. Rebecca, for her part, had retreated further into herself. She was there physically but emotionally distant, like she was keeping herself locked away in some invisible room. The worst part was, I knew I should have felt relief, that we weren't talking about it. I should have been glad we were ignoring what had happened, but I wasn't. The tension gnawed at me every time I saw her, and I knew it was doing the same to her. One evening after my father had left on another business trip, the silence became unbearable. Rebecca sat alone in the living room, reading a book that she clearly wasn't paying attention to. I stood in the doorway, unsure whether to say something or leave her be. The room was dim, the only light coming from the lamp beside her, casting long shadows on the walls. I stepped forward, clearing my throat, and Rebecca looked up, her eyes slightly wide like I had startled her. "Rebecca." I started hesitating. "We need to talk." She closed the book gently, placing it on the table beside her. For a moment she just looked at me and I could see the conflict written across her face. There was something unreadable in her eyes, fear maybe or regret, but also something that felt too much like longing. I know she finally said, her voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it. I've been thinking about it too. Her admission hung in the air between us, thick and heavy. I wasn't sure where to go from here, what to say, but I knew we couldn't keep pretending nothing had happened. I don't know what this is, I said, my voice low, careful, but it's messing with both of us. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly like she'd been holding her breath for days. I've made mistakes in my life, Thomas, she said, her eyes downcast. A lot of mistakes, but what happened between us? She trailed off, her words caught in her throat. I stepped closer, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. I knew I shouldn't be there, shouldn't be standing this close to her, but I couldn't pull myself away. We both know it was wrong. She continued, her voice barely a whisper, but I can't shake it either. That was it, the truth. We'd been dancing around for weeks. Neither of us could let it go. The room felt like it was closing in the walls, pushing us toward each other. There was no easy way out of this, no clean break. I could feel the pull between us, that same pull I'd felt since the first kiss. What do we do now? I asked, knowing there was no simple answer. Rebecca didn't reply. Right away she looked down at her hands, then back at me, her eyes searching for something. Maybe the courage to say what neither of us wanted to admit. But before she could speak, I felt the air shift, the tension, always lurking just beneath the surface, broke like a wave. I don't know, she finally said, her voice trembling. I don't know if there is anything we can do. I didn't realize I had moved closer until I was standing right in front of her, close enough to see the tears welling in her eyes. For a moment I thought she might stand up, might walk away, but she stayed where she was, rooted in place by something invisible, something that held us both in this moment. I don't want to hurt him, she said suddenly, her voice breaking. Your father. He deserves better than this. Her words hit me hard, and for a second the guilt washed over me like cold water. She was right. My father, oblivious to everything happening in his own home, didn't deserve this, but what could we do? The damage was already done. I reached out instinctively and took her hand in mine. It was a small gesture, but it felt like crossing another line, one we couldn't come back from. She didn't pull away, and for a brief second, everything felt suspended, like we were the only two people in the world. But reality was still there, looming over us. There were consequences to what we'd done, even if we couldn't face them yet. The silence returned heavier this time as we both sat there, trapped in the shadow of our own choices, unsure of what came next. The days passed like a blur, with neither of us willing to acknowledge what had been said, let alone what had happened between us. My father was back, oblivious to the tension that had settled into the walls of the house. Every meal, every passing moment felt like we were teetering on the edge of something we couldn't take back. I avoided Rebecca as much as I could, but it didn't help. She was always there in the kitchen, the living room, moving quietly through the house, as if she too was trying not to be noticed. But I noticed every time I saw her that night played in my head, the look in her eyes, the way her voice had trembled when she spoke about my father. One evening after my father had left for work again, I found myself alone with her in the house. I didn't plan on talking to her, but when I saw her standing by the window staring out into the dark, something shifted inside me. I walked up behind her close enough that she could feel my presence, but not close enough to touch. The silence between us felt suffocating, like it was weighing down on both of us. We can't keep doing this, I finally said, my voice low. She didn't turn around, but I saw her shoulders tense. I know she whispered, but neither of us moved the next day. Everything felt like it was hanging by a thread. I didn't know if it was just me or if Rebecca felt it too, but the tension between us had grown unbearable. Every time we passed each other in the house, it felt like the air was thick with unspoken words, with something unresolved that neither of us dared to touch. It wasn't until that evening that it all came to a head. My father had gone out for dinner with some colleagues, leaving Rebecca and me alone in the house. She was sitting on the couch, flipping through a book she clearly wasn't reading. I stood in the doorway watching her for a moment, trying to figure out what to do next. I knew we couldn't keep pretending, but I wasn't sure how to fix it, or if it even could be fixed. Rebecca, I said quietly, stepping into the room. She didn't look up, but I saw her grip tighten on the book. "We can't keep doing this." I repeated the same words I had said the night before. Only this time there was no answer, just the heavy sound of silence filling the space between us. I took a few steps closer, feeling the tension rise with every move. "I don't know what this is," I said, struggling to find the right words. "But it's killing me," that got her attention. Rebecca looked up at me, her eyes wide, as if she hadn't expected me to say it out loud. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I could see the conflict in her face, the fear and guilt that had been eating away at her since the first time we kissed. But there was something else too, something that hadn't gone away. Despite everything, she stood up, the book falling from her hands, forgotten. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Thesis isn't right." "I know," I said, stepping closer. "But I can't stop thinking about you, about us." Rebecca took a step back, her eyes full of confusion, maybe even panic. "We can't," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your father—" "I know," I interrupted. "But it's not just that. This whatever's happening between us, it's real. We can't ignore it anymore." For a moment she just stood there, her breath shallow, as if she were trying to hold herself together. I could see it in her eyes. She wanted to walk away to end this before it went any further, but instead she did the opposite. She closed the distance between us, her eyes locked on mine. The room felt like it was shrinking, the space between us vanishing as she reached up and gently touched my face. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like the final breaking point. Her touch was soft, hesitant, but it held all the weight of the things we hadn't said. And then, without another word, she kissed me. This kiss was different from the ones before. It wasn't filled with desperation or fear. It was slow, deliberate, like we were both giving in to something that had been building for far too long. It felt inevitable, as if this moment had been waiting to happen, no matter how hard we had tried to avoid it. When we finally pulled apart, the room seemed to exhale with us. Rebecca's eyes were full of tears, but she didn't wipe them away. She just stood there breathing heavily, her hand still resting on my cheek. "This is wrong," she whispered, though there was no conviction in her voice anymore. "I know," I replied, my own voice thick with emotion, "but I don't regret it." She looked away, her hand falling to her side. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I didn't have an answer. How could I? Nothing about this made sense, and yet it felt like the only thing that mattered right now. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, neither of us moving, neither of us willing to break the silence. Finally, Rebecca stepped back, her face a mask of conflict. "I need some time," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I need to think." I nodded, even though I knew thinking wasn't going to change what had happened or the way we felt. She turned and left the room without another word, leaving me standing there, my heart pounding in my chest, wondering how we had let things get this far and where it would all end. The following days were a blur. Rebecca and I barely spoke, and when we did, it was nothing more than a few awkward pleasantries. It felt as though we were both walking on eggshells, trying to pretend that the last few weeks had never happened. But no matter how hard we tried, the weight of it all hung in the air, making it impossible to ignore. Rebecca had gone away for a few days, something about visiting an old friend in another town. When she left, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief, but also a strange emptiness. I thought that maybe her absence would give me the clarity. I needed a chance to breathe without the tension that had been suffocating us both, but it didn't. Her absence only made things worse. I couldn't stop thinking about her every quiet moment. Every time I walked past the living room where we had stood so close, it all came rushing back. The guilt was gnawing at me, but so was the longing. It didn't make sense. Nothing about this situation did, but I couldn't shake it. I tried to throw myself into work, hanging out with friends, anything to keep my mind off Rebecca, but it was useless. Every distraction felt temporary, like I was just waiting for her to come back, waiting for the moment when we'd have to face whatever. This was between us again. When Rebecca finally returned, the atmosphere in the house felt even more charged. She didn't say much, just a quiet greeting. As she walked past me, I watched her go, feeling that familiar pull in my chest, that gnawing sense that we were spiraling towards something we couldn't control. That evening, as we both sat quietly in different rooms of the house, I realized it wasn't just about avoiding each other. It was about avoiding the truth, the truth that we couldn't undo what had happened, and no matter how hard we tried to pretend, it was already too late. When Rebecca returned, something in the air felt heavier. Neither of us mentioned the time she'd been away, but the distance between us had shifted into something more fragile. It was as though the unspoken tension had become an invisible thread pulling tighter each day. I knew deep down that things couldn't stay this way forever. Sooner or later, the thread would snap. That evening, the house was too quiet. My father was away again, leaving us alone, just like before. I found myself pacing around my room, trying to decide if I should really talk to her this time. The avoidance, the tension, it was suffocating me and I couldn't stand it anymore. I needed to know where we stood, even if it meant things might never be the same again. I walked downstairs and there she was sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a cup of tea in front of her. She looked tired, worn out by whatever had been weighing on her these past few weeks. I hesitated, but then took a deep breath and sat across from her. "We can't keep doing this," I said quietly, breaking the silence. My voice came out more desperate than I intended. Rebecca looked up at me, her eyes reflecting that same tiredness I'd seen for weeks. She didn't respond right away, just watched me as if she was deciding whether or not to let me in. I know she finally said, her voice barely a whisper, "I've been trying to figure out how to stop this." The weight of her words hit me hard. I didn't know if I was relieved or terrified. "Do you want to stop?" I asked, my heart racing. As the question hung in the air, she closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. "We have to," she said, but it wasn't an answer. It was more of an obligation, something she knew. We should do, but it didn't sound like what she really wanted. The room felt too small, too close. I leaned forward, my elbows resting on the table, trying to find the words to say what I had been holding back. "Rebecca, I don't know what this is, but I can't pretend it didn't happen. I can't just go back." Her eyes snapped open, and she looked at me with a mixture of fear and something deeper, something she hadn't yet said. "Neither can I," she admitted, her voice cracking. "But if we keep going down this road, we'll ruin everything." There it was, the truth. We had been avoiding the destruction that loomed over us, ready to tear apart. Not just us, but everything and everyone around us. My father, the family, the life we had all been pretending was normal. "I don't know how to stop," I said quietly, feeling the weight of my own words. I knew they were dangerous, but I couldn't lie anymore, not to myself, not to her. Rebecca stood up, her movements, slow and deliberate, as if every step she took was a decision she was struggling with. She walked over to the window and stared out into the darkness, her back to me. "I don't either," she whispered almost too softly to hear. I got up and moved toward her, unsure of what I was going to say or do. All I knew was that I couldn't let her walk away from this conversation from without some kind of resolution. As I reached her, she turned and we were face to face, closer than we'd been in weeks. "I'm scared," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm scared of what this means, of what we've already done." "I am too," I admitted. "But I don't think we can just ignore it." For a moment we just stood there, the tension between us growing by the second. I could feel the pull. That same pull I'd felt since the beginning, dragging us towards something we couldn't undo. And then before I could stop myself, I closed the gap between us. I kissed her again, but this time it wasn't driven by confusion or fear. It was deliberate, full of all the things we had never said. When we pulled apart, she looked at me with a mix of sorrow and acceptance. "This can't go on," she whispered, but her hand lingered on my arm as if she didn't want to let go. "I know," I said softly, my voice thick with the weight of everything that had just happened, "but we need to figure out what comes next." Rebecca didn't answer. Instead, she turned away, walking slowly out of the room. I stood there, watching her disappear into the shadows, knowing that whatever came next would change everything, whether we wanted it to or not. The house was quiet again, too quiet. My father had left early that morning for another business trip, leaving Rebecca and me alone for what felt like the 100th time. But this time something felt different. The weight of everything that had happened between us was pressing down on me harder than ever. I hadn't spoken to her since the night before. When we stood by the window, our words hanging in the air unfinished. I couldn't stop replaying it in my head. How close we had been, how things had gone too far, and yet it felt like there was still no end in sight. That afternoon I heard her footsteps in the hallway. She paused outside my door, as if considering whether to knock. I held my breath waiting, hoping, and then, to my surprise, she pushed the door open slightly, her face half hidden in the dim light. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice quiet, hesitant. I nodded, standing up from the bed, unsure of what was about to happen. Rebecca stepped into the room, closing the door softly behind her. She didn't look at me right away, just stood there. Her hands clasped in front of her, like she was holding herself together. "Thomas," she began, finally meeting my eyes. I'm leaving." I froze, not understanding at first. "What do you mean?" "I need to go," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I've thought about it for a while. Now, what's been happening? It's wrong. We both know it, and I can't keep doing this, living like this." Her words hit me like a punch to the chest. I felt the floor drop from under me, but I couldn't argue with her deep down. I knew she was right. We had crossed too many lines, and now there was no way back. But hearing her say it out loud, that was what hurt the most. "Where will you go?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She shook her head, tears filling her eyes. "I don't know yet, but I have to leave before this gets any worse." I wanted to tell her not to go, to ask her to stay and figure things out. But I couldn't find the words. There was nothing left to say that would make it better. We both knew this was the only way to stop the spiral we had fallen into. Rebecca took a step closer, her face etched with sadness. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I never meant for any of this to happen." "I know," I replied, my throat tight. Neither did I. For a moment we just stood there, the silence between us heavier than ever. And then, before I could stop myself, I reached out and took her hand. She didn't pull away. She looked up at me, her eyes full of tears, and in that moment everything else faded away. I leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't long or dramatic, just a soft, simple kiss that felt like the only goodbye we could give each other. There was no rush, no confusion, just the quiet understanding that this was the last time. When I pulled back, Rebecca let out a shaky breath, her hand still resting on mine. She stepped away, wiping her eyes, and I knew that this was it. There was nothing more to say. "I'll be gone by tomorrow," she whispered, turning toward the door. "Take care of yourself, Thomas." And then she was gone, leaving the room as quietly as she had entered. The door clicked shut behind her, and I stood there, staring at the empty space where she had been. The silence settled in, and I realized that everything had changed. We had reached the end, and there was no going back.